All right, we are live. Hey, everyone, this is Daphne Scott and Cliff Ravenscraft coming to you, and we are doing this audio podcast. However, we wanted to be able to do a little live streaming, and that's what we're doing. We're going to play the intro here a little bit, and that's really in the spirit of making it easier in post-production, so we don't want to have to go back and add things. So you're seeing really how the sausage is made right here up front and ready to go. And with that, we're going to get this started.
Oh, Daphne, before
Yes.
you do that, I just thought of one thing, and I know that we're already live,
Yeah.
but since in the spirit of seeing the sausage made, I just realized you asked me, is there any reason why I should not do it through StreamYard, but instead the Roadcaster?
Yeah.
And it just occurs to me that after the jingle, there's a fade out period. Are you
Yeah.
able to fade out in StreamYard? Because I'm not aware of that feature or functionality.
I am not. That's why I was gonna use the Roadcaster
Okay, so we
because
are
I can
going to
fade
do the
out.
Roadcaster.
Because I can fade out
There we
then.
go.
Yes. Yeah. If not,
Awesome. Thanks.
it'll play for like 5 minutes.
I know, it is like, we're talking over it.
Can you hear us? All right, here we go.
I am hearing it. It's very it sounds to me. So,
Yeah.
Daphne, is it actually being fed into the Roadcaster? Because
Mhm.
it's either driving too much audio, or because it's not coming through clearly,
Oh, interesting.
or it almost sounded though like, is it coming through your speakers in your studio? Because, or
Yeah, it
did you
should
hear it in
be.
your headphones?
I didn't hear it at all. Like,
Yeah.
and my
So
speakers are
so
not hooked up, so there must be something. Let's do this for the time being. I'm not gonna fade it though. I'm just gonna stop it. Let's see
that'll
if this
that'll
will work.
work.
Yeah.
All right.
Welcome to Life, the ultimate choose your own adventure game with hosts Cliff Ravenscraft and Daphne Scott. Join this dynamic duo as they explore the profound concept of life as a thrilling adventure, blending ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Embrace the joy of living with presence, creativity, and playfulness. It's time to navigate the game of life together. Are you ready to play? Let the adventure begin.
Yeah. Let the adventure begin.
Let the adventure begin. It has begun already.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's called having a backup plan.
That's exactly right.
Well, and today I think it's fitting because today we were talking about mindfulness. What is it? Okay, I'm bold to even ask that question. I think I don't know that we're going to define that today. However, that is what we're talking about, and I think having a backup is part of the whole plan. It can be part of the plan. So we're going to be talking about mindfulness today. What is it? What does it mean? And Cliff, I want to dive right into this. I'm going to, because we always have a little ramp up. We're kind of chatting before the show, before we hit record. And we said, okay, here's the topic today. And I want you to talk a little bit about your process because I put the outlines together. I kind of choose the topic and I give us what I call a foothold. It's just a jumping off point. I don't know where the show's going to go. I don't know really what I'm going to say. I don't know what you're going to say. But you said something and I thought this is great when we talk about mindfulness, because I think mindfulness, there's the idea that there's some intentionality, which would imply some future planning, maybe. But there's also another
Maybe,
part, maybe, right? There's another
maybe.
part to this. So talk a little bit about your process of of how much work you go through, Cliff, to get ready for the show.
Yeah, so we were talking briefly and said you had asked me, "How do you feel like last week went?" And I'm like, "I felt like it went great." It's the way that I typically show up, and as long as you're happy, because I think of this primarily as your show, it lives on your brand and stuff like that, and I'm delighted to co-host this with you. And I'm like, as long as you're happy with how last week went, that's how I like to show up. And
Yeah.
so what I had said was, I looked over the outlines just to see what topic you had chosen. I saw a little bit of a brief overview from above about where you're thinking our conversation might go, and I make it my intention to prepare nothing at all as to what I might contribute to said topic in advance. And the reason why is, first, I want to make sure that I know what the topic is and that I have some level of understanding of at least what the topic is. And as long as that's the case, then what I want to do is I just want to go with the flow in the moment rather than thinking, oh my gosh, Daphne had in the outline, she was going to ask me this. And I was really looking forward to really showing my stuff by
Yeah.
giving this response. And she never asked that question. It was in the outline.
And I
so
spent hours researching it.
oh my gosh, it's like that's the one thing that I thought I could contribute to the show. But instead, what I want to do is
Oh,
I'm like,
man.
okay, I got to feel where Daphne's going with this. And in the moment, my intuition will guide me, not my memorization.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. So I have a similar experience. And I think this is why, I've understood that frameworks can be helpful. And at the same time, there is this beauty of being in the moment. And that is all of my training in improvisational theater. And what you were describing, fits into this. And what you were describing, Cliff, how you were talking about, look, this is where how I'm coming to this and how I'm showing up to this. And I have no doubt about your ability to be present with the show. And when you were talking about that, that's also what came to me is like all my training in improvisational theater. There were frameworks, there were things that you're taught to help you, interact with one another when you're on stage, but there's no script. And what you just described, the minute that you get in your head, oh, I'm going to say this because that'll be really funny, right? We call it in one of the books that I read, they call it being in hell, because you're not present. You're not responding or reacting to what's going on in front of you, to the person that's in front of you. And boy, it was a real tempting thing to do, just to kind of get your own
Yeah.
agenda. Yeah. And you just miss the whole plot then. I call
You just said something, Daphne, and I know this may be nitpicking down to the detail,
do it.
but the funny thing is who I was 45 minutes before we went live, reviewing what the topic is and what I might contribute to who I am right now. I'm a completely different person.
No, really?
I genuinely mean that. Because so much has transpired between 45 minutes ago or 45 minutes before we hit record today. I
Yeah.
was upstairs in the kitchen. My wife was upstairs getting ready. We have our daughter's dog here with our dog. And so they're running around the kitchen and I'm reading the outline and I'm thinking about, okay, this is what the topic of the show is. And I'm in a completely different state of mind. I'm in a state of being. I'm in a completely different environment. And so what I would have been thinking about sharing intentionally, prescriptive or whatever, I would have been coming from a different place than where I am now. Since then, my wife came down, relieved me of the duties of caring for the dogs. I came down here and I'm setting things up. And now you and I have gotten into the back end of StreamYard and we're talking about how the technical aspects are going, different options for bringing in jingles and all this other stuff. And you and I are interacting with you brings forth from me a different state of being than me having the dogs so in essence I'm a different person. I'm coming from a different place. I'm in a different state than I was when I was upstairs. And so what I might say regarding any topic could be completely different. This is the now version of Cliff Ravenscraft.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go with that. So you mean you're not just a static fixed entity?
No, I'm ever evolving.
We all are. Well, this fits in great with the idea of mindfulness, I think, because there is this experience that we have of thinking that the me that is me, right? Like I have a name that I didn't choose, by the way. I've kept it. I could change it, but I've chosen to, I guess, to keep it. And with that comes the identity, right? That there is a person, there's this entity called Daphne, and Daphne has an identity, and that identity likes certain things and it doesn't like other things. And when we start, I'm going to call it subscribing to that idea, then I lose the essence of the change that actually, I'm going to say change, the change that's actually happening, but I lose the essence of sort of the reality, the less conventional reality that this isn't a fixed entity over here. It is ever evolving. It is ever changing. It is ever, if I let go of this idea that there's a fixed thing over here, that there's this Daphne over here, I can see where it does have this flow that goes through its natural, process. It becomes more of a process. That's what I would say. There's more of a process over here than a fixed entity. So I love that you brought that up, because I think when to plan, there's some beauty to planning. Love planning. And we're at the beginning of the year, right? So I have people have goals and resolutions, however they want to, projects, things they want to do. I do too, as far as the I is concerned. And there's also this beauty. There's this other level of a deeper truth, I think, that, at least in my experience, that says it's not as fixed as we think it is. I'm not as fixed as I think I am. And there's a real beauty to that. So I really appreciate you saying that. You're like, the Cliff that was here 45 minutes ago, it's no longer, the Cliff that was here 1 minute ago isn't really here. Right.
It reminds me of Taylor Swift. Are you familiar with her reputation? And she's like, I'm sorry, Taylor can't come to their phone right now because she's dead or something of like that. I don't know if that's the line, but
yes, she did say
but
something like that. Yeah.
That version of me no longer exists. This is the present moment, Taylor. And I really love that line. I love that imagery. It reminds me of Eastern philosophy, and I'll never forget hearing this. I think it was from Sadhguru the very first time I ever heard this, where he talked about what is personality. And he says, many of us think we have a personality, and personality comes from the root word persona, and it's another word for mask. Like Greek plays, they would have a persona, and it was a mask that you speak through, and they would have just a handful of actors, like let's just say 3 or 4 actors on a stage, but each actor on the stage would actually play multiple roles throughout the entire production. And so an actor would come out and they would hold one mask or persona, and they would play that role. They would play out that story, that narrative, that identity. And then they would go behind and they would come out and have another persona. And he says, here's what happens. Sometimes somebody will have glue on the persona, stick it to the face, it gets stuck. Now you have a personality.
That's right.
So a personality is nothing more than a mask that got stuck on your face.
Yes. And sometimes it fits real well and other times not so well, right? Like that's us wanting to make things certain.
And it goes with the title of our show, Life.
It does.
The ultimate choose your own adventure game. But as soon as we subscribe that if I'm going to carry the identity Cliff Ravenscraft, all right, so that's a name, a label. Again, I could change that just like you. But if I continue to carry this, if I subscribe, using your language, to the idea that Cliff is this, he's an Enneagram such and such, he's a NTF whatever, J whatever, he's this, he's that, then all of a sudden, if I subscribe to all of those things, that all of a sudden now I am limited in the choices I make within this adventure called life.
That's exactly.
And I love the fact that, you know what, I am Cliff Ravenscraft, and I'm an ever-evolving, second by second, millisecond by millisecond, divine spiritual being having an experience called life. And it can be anything I want to create.
Anything.
And I could continue, and I could have that full-blown experience and still choose to say, you know what, it would be easier to interface with my world as I'm currently interacting if I just choose to stick with the name Cliff Ravenscraft. You know, it kind of makes things easier.
Yeah, it's helpful. Right? Like when I call you, I'm like, hey Cliff, you're like, oh, you're talking to me. Hello. You know, it's like, hey, you.
It is funny though how many people, when they come through a spiritual awakening, there's so many spiritual paths where changing your name, choosing a different name, is such a part of that process. And I value and appreciate that practice.
Yes, and I've known several people who have done that, right? They don't identify anymore in that way, and so they feel that's a little bit. I mean, it's to me, it's sort of like rearranging the furniture in your house. Your environment is my environment right now in this room that I'm sitting in is representative of what is happening right now in my life, and I have changed this space. As a matter of fact, getting ready to do this show, I changed the space up again. I had drums sitting over here, my electric drums. I moved those all into my drum studio. I mean, I just really rearranged. I moved my desk into a different part of the room. There was some change in the space itself that wanted to happen because that's this current iteration of what is showing up.
Yeah.
So yeah, our spaces, our names, whatever the things are that we do that are representative of the changes that we're experiencing and going through. And then I want to go back to and Cliff, I think this is, and we'll get more into this mindfulness thing. And you brought up the Eastern mysticism. So we're going to get to that too. However, I think what you said about when we get attached to, the sort of glue of this mask that we wear, how we can miss out on the parts of life. And I think your story that you went through, you were, and I still secretly call you the podcast answer man, just so you know, but you were noticed the podcast answer man. That was a major part of your evolution. And I think one of the things that had attracted me so much to you, not beyond your integrity, was your ability to simply go through that process, that evolution in your life, and let go of things. And I think it would be really interesting just to have you say a few bits here about you letting go of that identity and the change that you went through and the fear that you went through. And I mean, I remember being in it, and you've said a lot of this on your own podcast too, but just being in that part of your journey, which frankly, I found incredibly inspiring. But I think it'd be helpful to share a little bit about this too, because it fits in with this idea of intentionality and mindfulness and recognizing what's happening in our life and then being really willing to let go of an identity. So I think that'd be helpful. Yeah.
So just a little short overview is I used to work in insurance full time. Nobody outside of Northern Kentucky ever knew who Cliff Ravenscraft was. Always had a desire to be of support, encouragement, inspiration, motivation to others to live the life that they were created to live. Started podcasting as a hobby in December 2005. And my wife and I together, we did that and grew an audience over the course of several different shows into the hundreds of thousands of people. So much so that I saw an opportunity through content creation, through podcasting, to do what I always felt most called to do in this world to the largest number of people. I'm like, I wonder what life would be like if I could leave my career as an insurance agent and go do this. So that's the first transition.
Yeah.
Now,
right.
couple of things to know about that. The insurance agency that I worked in was owned by my mom and dad, started by my grandfather in 1937, and I was next in line to take it over.
Wow.
So you talk about guaranteed job security. All right. And I left and by the way, I was incredibly successful.
And expectation, by the way. I would imagine your family had some expectations of you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, with the exception of the fact that when my mom and dad first invited me to work in the family business, it was so that I could help them out with digitizing and computerizing their client-based data systems, because it was all paper filing before me coming in there. And I said, listen, I will come work for you on two qualifications. Number one, you won't ever expect me to get my insurance license because I have no desire to sell insurance. And if I'm ever offered an opportunity to pastor a church full time, no matter how much less money I might make, I have to have your full blessing. And they agreed to that when I had started working with them back in, I think it was 1996.
Okay.
So while but over time, I will tell you that I began to see insurance work as far greater ministry to at least the world at the time. For me, was my local geographical area here. And so, yeah, I had kind of divorced myself from the idea that I'll pastor a church one day. And I'm like, wow, insurance is lucrative. And I am so much support and help to this community of tens of thousands of people here.
Yep.
But I did decide to leave that so that I could pursue the serving of this much greater audience and a much greater expression of who I am, and not sit there and fax proof of insurance cards every day to people who forgot to take them to the courthouse. So anyway, so I'm like, how am I going to make a living creating podcast content? And we had ideas, we had advertising sponsorships, and it just kind of happened naturally that people said, Cliff, can you teach me how to podcast?
Right.
And I'm like, well, gosh, yeah, I can. And that they're like, you need to let me pay you to do that. And I'm like, well, how much would you pay for somebody to teach? And I'm like, you're seriously? I'd pay you to let me talk about podcasting for an hour. There was a whole journey about pricing and stuff, but here's what I left behind. And this is what Daphne is getting to. I did grow my podcast Answer Man brand to where eventually I was doing a 4-week podcasting A to Z course where students paid $2,000 per student. I would host this every other month, and there was 20 to 40 students per session. So put the math together. That was pretty lucrative. I generated millions of dollars in sales of that course, millions of dollars, actually over $1 million in sales of podcast equipment, which I was selling as a reseller. And I had trained more than 40,000 people through all of the stuff that I was doing online to successfully launch a podcast. So there are 40,000 podcasters out there that I personally introduced to the world of podcasting. And after a decade, I became absolutely mind-numbingly bored with teaching. This isn't why teaching somebody how to get rid of the buzzing noise in the audio quality of their podcast was the same to me as faxing a proof of insurance card to the courthouse for you.
But Cliff, you're so good at it.
I was good at it. And I could spend all day, every day, 8 to 10 hours a day doing it.
Yeah.
And I could make tons of money doing it, which I could have done in insurance as well. I've proven that model to be financially successful, but not internally rewarding.
Yeah. Yep.
So over time, I realized what I'm really doing is not helping people launch a podcast. Yes, that's a byproduct. But what I recognize is the greatest value that I had was helping people discover who am I? Why am I here on this planet? What is it that I desire? And how can I overcome anything that holds me back from creating that?
Yeah.
And as soon as I learned that, it was about an 18-month transition, but I had to overcome all of my limiting beliefs about leaving yet another financially guaranteed, proven economic model for my business to go in a completely different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what I find so inspiring. And I too I've done that twice. In terms of changing my career, changing what I'm doing, letting go of the money. Someone said to me one time the story of golden handcuffs, right? And I'm like, yeah, I get golden handcuffs. You're in the handcuffs. Somebody else it makes it look like they have all the gold. Everyone thinks the handcuffs are gold. I'm like, oh, no, the handcuffs aren't the gold. So letting that go, I think Cliff is part of, and you going through is part of the process, and letting go of that identity, not just, there's we'll call it, there's a very transactional part of the world, right? Which is the money and, paying the bills, and you've got a family and the whole thing, and mortgage, the whole thing. And there's also underneath that is I think the deeper part of it, which is there's an identity over there that you're also letting go of. And a comfort with that identity, right? Again, we're back to what we talked about in our first show, that there's sort of this idea of certainty. Like I know who I am in this world. I know where I fit. This is predictable. It's comfortable. It's comfortable. Also, and we enjoy parts of that, but to be able to let go of that, and you've said to me a couple of times, like there's just a must that has to happen. Like the discomfort has gotten great enough. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's really part of, let's get into this mindfulness thing, because I think that's part of, I've said this, you can come to your choices sort of, if I made it binary, you could come to your choices a couple of ways. One is you can allow the discomfort to get great enough, the pain, right, to get great enough where it forces your hand to make a change. Or another option is that you can come to these changes through a greater vision for yourself.
That's it. Yeah.
Right. And there's probably a combination of things happening there. I would imagine in your experience, you had some discomfort, And at the same time, though, you were experiencing something that was like, oh, I need to keep going over there. Right. Like this is, so I don't know if that's true, but
Yeah, no. So for me, there was certainly a growing discontent on both the
yes.
insurance side before I leaped into the podcast world. And then there was a growing discontent with the technical aspects of teaching podcasting and what I felt most called to do in the world. There was a growing discontent, and there was a pain associated with it. And if it weren't for that, which I'm thankful for in both cases, I don't know that I would have asked myself the question. I wonder what life would be like if fill in the blank, which is
Yeah.
one of the best questions I've ever asked myself.
I think it's
Ever.
the only question. I
Yeah.
wonder. I mean, wonder questions, and I learned that from Katie Hendricks. Wonder questions, right? I wonder what it would be like
Yeah.
if instead of if only I had this, I'd be happy. It's I wonder what I mean, questions are, the quality of the questions we ask is everything, right?
Yes.
I think. So yeah, I wonder what it would be like. I wonder what it would feel like. I wonder, and those questions are very
And
powerful.
that's what led me to the compelling vision of the future. And there's some ancient wisdom from the Bible
Yes.
that says, "Without vision, the people shall perish."
Yeah.
And so that without some sort of compelling idea of what you want to create or what you desire, the desires of your heart, without that compelling vision drawing you, then I don't know that I would enjoy the adventure of life as much as I do.
Yeah. And it is an
So
adventure.
and there is something to be said about the initial pain. I liked the fact that it woke me up to the idea. It's like, maybe something else could be possible here.
Yeah.
But I do want to stress that I've since been made the transition from podcast answer man to mindset answer man. And today I coach people around business mindset and strategy.
Yeah.
And a lot of people making a transition from corporate world into full-time self-employment or whatever. Just I help a lot of people as brand new entrepreneurs or people who are transitioning from owning their own business for 30 years and they just sold it and they're like, who am I now?
Yeah.
For the last 30 years, this was my identity. Helping them discover that. And through this process, I've always discovered that those who are running away from pain only end up finding the same vibration of pain and suffering wherever it is they go to next.
Yeah. Yes.
Because there is this thing called law of attraction. I'm a believer in it. I don't necessarily think that everybody believes in it, but that's fine. But the thing is, though, is that if this is your experience of life, is that you're running from this, I think there's an opportunity for you to go through and experience the pain of what you're going through and evolve through it and become the person that you desire to be without making the change. And then if you can make that change from a compelling vision standpoint, chances are the problems won't lag behind
Well,
you and walk out the door with you.
well, what you're talking about, I think, Cliff, is again this pattern. This fits right into mindfulness. So I'm simply making decisions to avoid something. I'm simply making decisions to avoid something versus, and therefore I'm in a reactive state, right? I'm reacting. I'm not in a responsive state, which is, yes, I'm noticing I don't enjoy doing this thing anymore, or I'm not this person that enjoys this thing anymore. This has run its course. And I wonder what it would be like. I'm noticing that I'm drawn to this thing over here. I wonder what it
Yeah.
would be like to create more of this in my life. So when we're in the space of simply wanting to avoid something, then our entire world is constructed around avoiding that thing. And we can't, and I'm going to give you a real world life experience I had yesterday on an airplane. And you know how much I love.
Oh, I know Daphne's love for airplane travel.
You know, I love our commercial air travel. So many suggestions, by the way, that I have for them to improve this. Anyway, besides that, if I'm wanting to avoid simply missing a connecting flight, or if I'm wanting to avoid that, then my life becomes one of missing all of the beautiful nuances that are happening in the moment because I'm only focused on avoiding this thing over there. I'm missing out on, well, what can happen here? What are all the opportunities in the adventure? What are all the possibilities that I have? I don't have all the possibilities available to me because I'm only focused on avoiding this one thing. And it does become very restrictive, and it becomes constrictive to our life. And and again, we're in a reactive state. So let's talk a little bit about this mindfulness thing. I think this is a nice segue. How I relate to this idea of mindfulness, I think and you've talked about it just a bit here. You said, Cliff, you work with entrepreneurs, and I work with people in the business world who, I call it thriving in the 9 to 5. And the idea being that, are they present to really what's happening? Right? They're not in a threatened state. So that's the first thing. I think when we talk about being mindful, we're able to recognize when we're reacting from threat. And the other opportunity then is to get ourselves grounded enough to simply look that maybe we're not as threatened as we think we are. And most of the time it's being threatened around our identity, right? We're not physically being threatened. That happens too, but we're in a non-threatened, non-reactive state. And therefore our choices do look different. We have more choices available to us in this adventure and to be able to play this game. And we're not as attached. And I think this is the other part of this. We're not as attached to the outcome as we might be when we're attempting to avoid something. If I'm attempting to avoid something only, right, and I'm in a reactive, threatened state, then I am going to become very attached to that outcome. And that loses, now life starts to me, I describe it as life feels really dry. Right? There's not a juice to it. So I don't know what your reactions are to that, but I think just sort of getting a framework around, and there are a lot of different definitions of mindfulness. I'll read one at the end of the show, but I think that non-reactive, non-threatened state, which by the way, I got that from the Conscious Leadership Group, who I worked with for forever and have dear friends there, Diana Chapman, one of my best friends. And I thought it was a really good way of describing this sort of experience, non-threatened, non-reactive state. And I think the first step is just recognizing when we are in a threatened, reactive state. That's the first thing, right? So I don't know how you relate to the idea of mindfulness, but I'd be curious.
Well, there's so many different ways that I relate to mindfulness, but I want to share how I'm relating to what you talked about with threat, the idea of threat.
Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is brainwave states. I wish in our educational system that we were taught about brainwave states. So, and there's and what's crazy is I tried to read a lot of books on hypnosis to understand different brainwave states, and I could never figure out anything because I know in college I was a part of Tau Kappa Epsilon.
Okay.
And so I know the Greek alphabet at least a little bit, right? So there's alpha, beta, and then delta, gamma, and it goes in this order. But that's not how they categorize brainwave states. Are you aware that they're out of order?
Yes.
So it starts with beta. All right. And there are 3 ranges of beta. There's high range beta, mid range beta, and low range beta. And high range beta brainwave states are a higher frequency, and it's kind of going crazy up there. And that is your fight or flight mode.
That's right.
And in fight or flight mode, what I've learned through my study and also my experience is when I'm in flight or fight mode, I have no access, seemingly, to my intuition, to internal thoughts, to being present in the moment and making a conscious decision. The only thing I can do in fight or flight is rely on what I've agreed to, what beliefs exist within me, what I've been conditioned to, how to react in each and every situation. And that is programmed by television shows, movies, religious figures on stages, my parents, my school, government program, messages, all of this stuff. And so I become a puppet to my beliefs and my narratives that I've subscribed to, using your earlier language. In that state, that's all I am. I am a reactive puppet in this world of reality. And then at least in mid-range beta, now I can be in a crowd, but I'm still kind of like, there's a perceived potential threat. And then in low range beta, that's where you and I can be in a conversation like this. We are not perceiving any threats. We're not actually on the lookout for somebody to burst into our offices here and threaten us. And so we're able to tap into some intuition. But then, Daphne, and by the way, so what I've just done is I've just educated, hopefully, some people on the 3 different ranges of our beta conscious awake brainwave states.
Yeah.
Then we can drop down to, I think it's alpha is next.
Yep.
And when we get into alpha, and I can get anyone listening to us in an alpha wave brain state. And all you have to do is take just a second, and I want you to breathe in, and I want you to feel the warmth. I want you to feel the coolness of the air as it goes through your nasal passage, and then breathe out and feel the warmth as it comes out. Now, if you did that, what you just did is you placed your energy and attention and awareness internally instead of externally. That instantly put you into an altered state of consciousness called alpha brainwave state. And that's how quickly we can drop down. And you
Yes.
can't do that in a high range, threat, blah, blah, blah state. And
Right.
so, wow. And then all of a sudden, if I could, so Daphne, let me ask you this just real quickly. Tell me about a birthday party that you really loved, one location where you remember being, and just paint the picture of what that's like. And I and our audience is going to imagine that with you.
I'm going to talk about Saturday. I celebrated with my mom her 80th birthday. And we were at my brother's house. Him and his wife hosted all of our family there, and we had music playing, and everyone was talking, and my mom was sharing stories from her life, and I got her this poster that said, "Here are all the things that happened in the year of your birth." It was 1944, which is an education for me, by the way, also. And she was reading that and sharing it with our family and talking about just memories of her life, and so appreciative. And my brother wrote a poem for her and read that. It was incredible. It was an incredible evening. And just to be able to be there, um, knowing so many of my friends who have lost their parents, and being able to be there with her was just a very special moment. And we had a wonderful lobster dinner because that is her favorite special celebration dinner.
I love that. And so, matter of fact, as you were talking about this, I imagine your mom as 80 years old. So I'm thinking of somebody of an advanced age, and I'm imagining her. I imagined her sitting on the couch in a living room in a pleasant area. I'm imagining other family members seated around. I'm imagining the opening up of this vision board of all the memories and hearing and I'm imagining in the background the music that might be playing. And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden, because I'm using imagination, that is all internally focused. And that put me into what's called theta brainwave state. And the fact that we're actually still consciously awake and interacting we were actually entering in and bouncing through alpha theta brainwave state. So now we've already, and then of course there's delta brainwave state, which you could get even deeper. You could go into full on
Gamma.
theta,
Right.
and then gamma is this amazing thing which can happen in any brainwave state. But here's what when I think about mindfulness, what I think about is like, wow, if I find myself threatened or perceive a threat, or if I perceive chaos, or I'm definitely reacting. So it's very common language today. If I'm triggered,
Yeah.
if
Okay.
I find myself triggered, and I do get triggered sometimes. It's
Sure.
like, wow, where did that come from? That person just said that thing, and that did not feel good. And it's like, oh, okay. And so what I instantly try to do is I try to go internally and say, you know what? I am aware that I am reacting right now. I am aware that emotionally that there are chemicals that are flowing through my body that has increased the blood flow through my body, my increased heart rate, my breath is starting to get shortened, and my body feels as though I am being threatened.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned not to take things personally. This person, what they said, that doesn't have anything to do with me. It has to do with what they are perceiving me. It's their picture of who I am. That doesn't define who I am. And what's going on is I recognize there are still some internal beliefs that what they said is important and that it's true and that it means something negative for me and therefore could cause me harm. And then I begin to question the reality of that. Is there evidence to support that? Is there evidence to the contrary? And so for me, when I get into a mindfulness moment, I actually think about what was my brainwave state when I actually heard it. Is the threat real? Can I bring myself? Can I breathe? Can I actually get my focus internally? Can I get into what I call the seat of awareness?
Yeah.
And when I get into the seat of awareness, then I can observe from the seat of the observer what's happening in my physical being and how is that interacting with my psychological belief system. And that's creating this physiological result in my body. And I'm like, oh, wow. And then it's like, okay, and what do I want to create in this moment based upon all of this data?
Yes. Well, so at the end of all of that process, you're able to ask a really powerful question.
What do I
Right.
want to create?
What do I want to create? This is the isness. You've sort of ridden this wave between the reaction and acceptance, and right. And that's why I call like kind of riding waves of lives. I know that's coming. It's coming. I am going to fall into reaction. I am going to feel threatened by things, right? That's just part of living. I want to rewind all the way to the beginning of what you said, Cliff, because I think this is the whole point. When we are in that reactive state, our brain waves do change. And we know, I think most people are probably familiar with the idea of fight and flight. It is absolute true. And this is where science is so helpful that our prefrontal cortex, our higher reasoning center, goes offline. We
Yes.
literally are reacting from the amygdala, the lizard part of our brain. And that is, we touched on this last week. We didn't get into the whole free will conversation in its entirety. But we did touch on this last week in the show too, like how at choice are we? Well, I think we're getting to some of that. When you're in this reactive state, not very much. You are simply reacting from the things we've subscribed to, our old beliefs, ways we've been taught to handle stress, ways we've been taught to react in the world. We've picked up these things from our caregivers, from society at large, wherever we've gotten them from, things that we've subscribed to. And there is this also this ability. This is what you just described in that whole process, this ability to ride these different waves, to get with sort of what's happening. And then we land in a more powerful question, which means our brain, the bigger parts of our brain are coming back online, right? We're able to ask these more powerful questions and to be in this. And so how, in my experience, sometimes that happens very quickly. Other times it just depends on what the thing is that has occurred for me where I've gotten, reactive. And sometimes I work through that very easily and sometimes not so easily. It might take me a minute. I think that's the other real beauty, right? Yes. So you've just described more so not defining what mindfulness is, but I think really talking about a process. And it is a process. And I think that some of when we talk about these things, putting a verb to it, like I'm mindfuling versus I'm mindful, there's just these waves that come. And I think that fits in with the brainwave idea, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what choices are available to us, which is really, and I think how we come to these things, there's no one right way. And I find, again, this is probably the thing that is the most, I think it's the most constrictive part of this process for people, is that there's this searching for this one right way to do it. And if you're not doing it that right way, so you mentioned all the Eastern mysticism. I made a whole list of them. We have all the different ways that we can come to this thing we call mindfulness. I'm a fan of all of it, by the way.
I am as well.
Yeah, we've got meditation, prayer, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, mindful. I list them all. Mindful eating, yoga, stoicism, which has made a real revival, by the way. Confucianism, Taoism, you've been studying, I think, lately. Reflection, the contemplative approaches, gratitude practices. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And I think all of them are beneficial. I think all of them have their place.
Absolutely. Every single one of them have their value. And if any of them don't resonate with you today, then rather than just saying, I don't like that or I'm against that, just go find something that does resonate. Find any modality or any method that allows you to either address the situations of life, or cope with the situations of life, or evaluate the situation, whatever it is, if it's therapy or if it's spirituality, no matter whatever helps you have a higher quality of life and
Yes.
allows you to get less reactive and more creative in your life.
Yes.
That's what allows you to experience life where you can choose your own adventure.
Exactly. So let's talk about, in that spirit, I think this is where, with all of these things, let's talk about our emotional states. And I think this is really what you also were pointing to in your example, Cliff, which was just so well articulated. Really, our ability I'm going to say, regulate our emotions. I'm not a big fan of that language, by the way. I say it because I haven't really thought through a better way of expressing it. It always feels like, I'm going to regulate my emotions, meaning I'm going to have none, or I'm going to become a robot in some way. I do have a reaction to describing it in that way. I like the idea of, I'm going to be very intentional about creating my emotional state.
Yeah.
I like that. Look, I'm finding the language as I speak.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that. And what about, and for me, as you're speaking that, what came up for me in the moment, and I've never used this before, but I like to navigate through my
yes.
emotional state.
Yes.
And navigate means that occasionally when I navigate from my home in the Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area, and I want to take a road trip to Nashville, I'm going to choose a path that I think is going to be the quickest to get what I want to experience, right?
Right.
To my destination. But occasionally something unplanned comes along the way and there's a deviation. And so I
Yes.
need to navigate around and do that in the most efficient way possible. Now, don't get me wrong, uh, I could choose to just get angry, upset, and turn around and say, it's just better if I just stay at home, you know? But so I like that. So what came up for me as you're, it's like this idea. I want to navigate through the spectrum of my emotional opportunities.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. And so, how we're choosing our emotional state, then, if we come back to fight and flight, and how I think this is some of what people, as I've worked with people and coached them, some of what they're also desiring, or a great deal of what they're desiring, which makes total sense, is to feel good. Like, I want to feel good. I want to feel at peace, feelings, emotions. I want to have the sensation of peace in my body. By the way, no matter what is occurring, I have not had someone say to me, I need my life to go perfectly. And if it doesn't, I'm just going to be upset all the time. What
I don't know
maybe you
anybody
have.
who's ever consciously said that, but I do know a handful of people who seem to operate through that life that way.
Yeah. I've had more,
And
yes.
by the way, I used to be one of them.
Me too. What I've experienced more is where people want to know, how do they navigate life and feel good when it isn't going the way that we imagined that it would.
Well,
Ah,
first, trade your expectation for appreciation.
yes.
So
Yes.
if we are perceiving that life isn't going good, well, if
Right.
we're perceiving
How you
something
imagined it.
negative, and it could be a terminal illness. So
Yeah.
we talked about my friend Dan Miller, but I can tell you right now, go and check out. Dan's still here. He's facing his final days on this earth, but he's not facing it in a low emotional realm of vibration, such as fear, anger, all of that stuff. He
Yeah.
is literally approaching it from a different emotional level.
Yep.
So, but I forgot what I was saying. The initial insight that, or response that you had said, or my
Yeah.
response to what you were saying, just left me
Well, it'll come
when I
back.
was thinking about.
Yeah.
But
Thinking about,
anyway, so the whole idea about emotional state, one of the things that I thought, as you were speaking, is the idea that every emotional state is valuable.
yes.
So that's the first thing, to appreciate fear, guilt, shame. I used to, quote unquote, say, you know what? I never want to experience these. There's nothing good that ever comes out of it, except for the fact that they're incredibly valuable tools to to help me become aware of beliefs that I've adopted that
Yeah.
equate something is a threat to me.
Yeah,
And so
and I want to tag that just for a second, because when we're wanting to avoid those things, again, when we're coming back to your appreciation, we're right back where we started,
that's
right?
it.
Right. We're right back in the aversion world and wanting to avoid it. So just to tag onto that, that's the appreciation of like, wow, I'm noticing I feel a lot of shame or a lot of guilt around this right
Yeah,
now.
and
What's that about?
so here's my favorite metaphor of all of this. It's these lower emotional states that if you were to look up, it's called The Map of Consciousness.
Yeah.
And there's a book by Dr. David R. Hawkins called The Map of Consciousness Explained. And he gives this vibrational chart of emotional states. And these lower vibrational emotional states that calibrate below 200 and below, he states that gosh, what is going on? I get in halfway into a situation
You're
here and
so
I'm losing
excited.
that train. I
You're
am so
excited.
excited. But anyway, if we it's the metaphor is where I was going with.
Yes.
But these lower emotional states, I see them as check engine lights in my
Mm.
car. And so I am thrilled. Okay, I am beginning a process of trying to respond with a thrill and delight in my heart when my car's check engine light comes on.
You're working with
I
it. You're working with
I
it.
I have not yet mastered this skill. But,
So good though.
by
It
the
is a
way,
skill.
I am in the seat of awareness. I am aware that sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on this time? How much is this thing gonna cost me? On top, you not know is like blah. It's like, but no, if that check engine light wasn't there and it continued, if it didn't notify me of something that's not going in internally within this engine and how it was designed to operate efficiently, then this could be far more costly down the road if I weren't notified about it now. I'd rather spend a couple of $100, even $1,000 or $2,000, than to completely lose out on the tens of thousands of dollars of the investment in this car. So the check engine light. And so how much more valuable is my life when my emotional check engine lights come on? So if I get triggered into anger, if I get triggered into shame, feeling shame, if I feel a great level of guilt or of loss and all of this other stuff, it just alerts me that hey, something's going on internally and the way that I am perceiving the world is not necessarily in alignment with the way that I was designed to experience life.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and so something internally is not operating according to manufacturer specs.
You got to look. You know what? Now you're diagnosing the buzz in a different way.
Yes. Oh, thanks. Oh, I'm still diagnosing technical buzzing.
You're still, no matter what, you're still getting the technical buzzing.
I love it.
Well, it is like that. Well, it is a vibration, right? I think of it as a vibration. The check engine light is on. My guitar is out of tune. And this is where the idea of vibrations, if anybody, if you're listening and you play a guitar, you played an instrument, you can hear when the strings aren't in tune. And literally you can hear a vibration. They don't vibrate at there's a sloppiness to the resonance. And boy, when you tighten it just right, or you loosen it just a little bit, that goes away. And there is just a steady hum of the string, so there's not this sort of weird tone. And I think that is when we're sort of resonating, to use that word. It's a great word, that we're resonating. It means that there's this real steady vibration. Everything is in sync. It's tuned up.
Yeah.
And when the check engine light comes on, it's not.
And so going to your original question, how do we handle this scenario? It is about the idea of like, okay, I recognize I'm not feeling good. So how does trade your expectation for appreciation? So one of the things that I've discovered, I haven't found any evidence to disprove this, but I heard it once. I've heard it several times. I have evaluated, and so far I've not found any evidence to the contrary. But as far as I know, I can only feel one emotional state at any given moment in time. I can't both be depressed and filled with gratitude at the same time. I can't feel shame and feel unconditional love at the same time.
Mhm.
I've just not been able to do that. So if I'm feeling what I might determine to be a negative or undesired emotional state, that means that I must be focused on something that I perceive not to be going well.
Yeah.
And that focus on that thing will draw from me more related to that thing. So when I say that, trade my expectation of how I thought this scenario was going to go, or what the results that I would get, or how I thought this day was going to happen, this did not go according to plan. I'm recognizing that my check engine light has just come on. But you know what? Gosh, and I could always do this so far. Every single morning, I wake up and I'm like, I have the opportunity to say, wow, I slept through the entire night. Number one, what a gift that is. The restoration, what a gift it is to have this amazing body that has this immune system that works most of the time in my favor and is fighting off anything that came up out of the day before, the toxins from stress and cortisol. But I love the fact that every single day so far, for nearly 51 years, every morning when I wake up, the earth is still rotating around the sun precisely at the exact distance necessary to keep me from freezing to death or burning to death overnight.
It's
What
so
a gift.
I come back to gravity.
Yeah.
Like, I somehow put my feet down and I'm not stuck to the ceiling. Incredible.
And the fact that I mean, you and I are incredibly blessed in our world today that the how much food is available to us. I
Yeah.
mean, the oxygen that's available to us, the fact that there's just so much one can be filled with gratitude about.
Yes.
Now, granted, this could be a temporary solution, at least to get you out of the fight or flight or to get you out of that high range beta. And that's
Exactly.
the key.
That's the
The
key.
key is to get out of the high range beta. And when you can start getting internally, you start having access to that prefrontal context or cortex. And that's when you can begin to reevaluate the previously undesired, unexpected circumstance. And you can begin to reframe what it means. And then there's a powerful question. What does this make possible?
Yeah. Yes. That, I mean, and that I think in terms of choosing your own adventure, coming back to the game, it's like that's what we have available to us, right? And all the skillful means. There are 1,000 skillful means, and I encourage you to find yours. 1,000 who's joining us today, 1,000 skillful means to being able to choose that emotional pathway, right? How we want to feel in that moment. And you described a process, Cliff, again, and just for momentarily seeing the appreciation that we can have, even when we're experiencing not something that might not feel so good in the moment. How can we come to some level of appreciation? How can we come to some level of a deeper understanding and reframe that just to get us out of that? I call it kind of like being locked in the garage, kind of just get us out of that for a minute. I'm like locked in this cage of emotion. How can I get myself out of that just for a second so I can get access to the bigger way that I can show up, right? Have a different level of resonance and then go from there. So
Yeah.
I'm always, I mentioned this on our last show too, I'm always intentional about being too high-minded with some of these things because I have seen how many of these concepts, and I want to asterisk this right now on the show. I've seen how many of these concepts can be utilized in a less than healthy way for people. There are challenges. There are all of the very less than savory things that go on in our world. And this is for each individual to find their path with. I think that's the take home part of this too. It's for each individual to find their path. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate so much about you, Cliff, too, is your path. And it looks so different than my path. And yet when we talk about it, there are these same threads that we keep pulling, right? We're finding them more and more. And I think in this day and age, we're able to find those threads more and more as well. But really looking at what's this whole mindfulness thing about? What are we really talking about? And why should we care? And I think that's the other part too. Why? Who cares if I can see myself as, not as fixed as I thought I was? Who cares if I can go ahead?
Yeah, who cares? So why should we care about mindfulness? And what came up for me as soon as you asked that, why should I care about mindfulness?
Yeah. Who cares?
Mindfulness is my ability to choose my next move
Yeah.
intentionally,
Yes.
not based upon what my third grade teacher said or what some priest or preacher said or what, the expectations of my audience has.
Yep.
But instead, if I could be mindful in the moment and see that, quite frankly, my options in almost every situation are nearly unlimited.
They are unlimited. And that's the great adventure. I think this is a perfect time to wrap up the show.
I think so.
I think so. I think we got it. Well, I'm just gonna do our outro right now because I'm gonna play a little bit of music, but I don't have our outro tune up. But I do want to let everybody know that they can find us at our respective websites, cliffravenscraft.com and daphne-scott.com. And they can find the show at chooseyourownadventurepodcast.com. So you can find the show there and connect with us on the show there. And we hope that you really enjoyed the show. I'm going to play this little outro music. What do you think?
Sounds great. Hey, everyone, go be mindful and choose your own adventure.